Welcome to Washington in Focus. I am Jeremy Laud. Joining me today is the Center Square's State House reporter, Brett Davis. Brett, this one's hot off the presses. We just published a story this morning. Washington Supreme Court upholds constitutionality of capital gains tax. Talk to me about this ruling.
The day we've been waiting for has finally arrived. So I guess I should provide some background on today's decision. So back in 2021, the legislature passed and the governor signed a 7% tax on profits of more than $250,000 from the sale of assets like stocks and bonds. But then in March of last year, Douglas County Superior Court Judge Brian Huber ruled the tax was unconstitutional. He said it was an income tax and not an excise tax, as proponents claimed, and that it violated the Constitution's uniformity clause. It doesn't allow increases and doesn't allow different rates of taxes on income. Bob Ferguson, the state attorney general, directly appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, and in July, they agreed to take the case. In November, the Supreme Court allowed the Department of Revenue to begin collecting the tax, even as they were still considering whether or not the tax was constitutional. And oral arguments.
And they did so unanimously.
Yes.
That's important because that to a lot of us seemed to tip their hat that we knew that where this was going.
Right. And then oral arguments in the case were heard on, I believe, January 26th. And we knew this was coming. I saw that it was going to be posted sometime this morning. So I was just waiting with bated breath to see what the Supreme Court was going to rule. And basically, they upheld the constitutionality of the tax. I can read some of the decision. Hopefully, it's not too dry. It says the majority opinion was the capital gains tax is appropriately characterized as an excise because it is levied on the sale or exchange of capital assets, not on capital assets or gains themselves. This understanding of the tax is consistent with a long line of precedent recognizing excise taxes as those levied on the exercise of rights associated with property ownership, such as the power to sell or exchange property, in contrast to property taxes levied on property itself. So basically, they're saying that the uniformity clause doesn't apply under Section 7 of the state constitution.
There's a couple of things about this ruling that struck me. One is, first of all, that interpretation is unique to our Supreme Court. The IRS in any state who bothers to take a stance on this one says that capital gains taxes are income taxes. So we're the one, we have magical definitions in the state.
So Jason Mercier of the Washington Policy Center, who's been fighting against this tax, he summed it up nicely online today. He said the Supreme Court has discovered the first standalone excise tax on capital gains income on the planet. Every other tax jurisdiction in the world says a capital gains tax is an income tax. More to come.
Yes, much, much more to come. Now, I'm never sure how seriously to take the reasoning of the Supreme Court because they shift. But it seemed to me that one of the things that you've been covering that Democrats in the legislature have been pushing for is a wealth tax, right? That would be a tax of 1% of someone's global wealth. Now, there are possible federal constitutional problems with that, but it's not very clear to me that, at the state level, one of the problems is that, so now the Supreme Court has said, okay, you can do this if it's on the sale of assets, but you can't tax assets themselves. Those are property, right? Would that seem to push back against a wealth tax?
In my opinion, it seems to. Last I heard on the wealth tax, it wasn't doing so well in the legislature. I'm trying to remember who. I heard somebody talking about the other day, and I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but they didn't seem to be, one of the legislators didn't seem to be confident that it would go any further. So maybe the Supreme Court decision will assuage those people's disappointment.
Will this open the door to more income taxes characterized as asset taxes?
That's certainly the fear of people who oppose this tax. I know there was an email. I can't remember the name of the representative. I think it was a representative said in an email. Basically, they're using this decision that's come out now to try and push for just a general income tax. So that's
was
the
it
fear.
Peterson?
I think it was. I think that's
okay.
Right.
He was the one that was pushing for this confrontation in the first place because he believed, and rightly so, that the Supreme Court would side with this.
Right. So there's a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth on the opposition to this because they fear it's just going to open the door to an income tax.
Yeah, though at least
Holy Grail.
According to the way it's written, it wouldn't. Is that correct?
I believe so, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, this is breaking. There's we got a story up early today. It said, this is a developing story. We're going to get a lot more into that story. I'd appreciate it if people click early, click often. We could use the hits, but
I'm going to have to read through the decision more in more detail myself. I skimmed through it this morning, put up the story, and then it was time for the podcast.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to, get up what you have at the moment, and that's all you got, And this was one of those times of the essence thing, and so we'll have more from the decision. We'll have more from the reactions. We'll just have more. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Brett Davis, this is Jeremy Lott. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.